This is one of the organizers of the Free Your Mind 2 conference, John G. Vibes.
Today's presentation title is called Breaking the Resource Control Monopoly. And, oh, sorry. Yeah. All right. So, before we get started today, I'm going to do a quick presentation on the many monopolies that control all the resources that we have access to that we need to sustain our lives. And freedom, for the most part, is a state of mind, and it's all about what is going on inside of your mind and the decisions that you make on the earth. But at the same time, there are restrictions to the things that we need that prevent our bodies from asserting self-ownership. And that is one of the things that we need to conquer in order to achieve freedom and abundance. And first, I'm just going to start off with giving a broad, kind of breakdown of some of the monopolies that there's a lot of good research on. And primarily, there is the energy monopoly, which many of you guys know about Nikola Tesla. And Mark has done a lot of great research recently. I believe it was called Scarcity to Abundance. So you can check that out for some more information on that. And that is one of the vital aspects, because one of the reasons why we don't have abundance is because it's so difficult to transport supplies that are needed to areas that don't have infrastructure, to people who can't afford to build infrastructure. And then the people who are out in the middle of nowhere aren't even really allowed to own their own land, which is another aspect that's very important that I'll get to later. And finally, I'm going to talk about the banking system in a little bit more detail, because economics, I've found, is extremely important in this whole process too, because basically economics is defined as broadly working with scarce resources and figuring out how to distribute them in the best possible way. And right now, we're using all this violence to control everything that's going on around us. And people aren't, as I said earlier, they're not allowed to assert their self-ownership, regardless of the freedom that they have in their mind. And that's a lot of the restrictions that people like us are experiencing, because every time we try to do something and empower ourselves, it seems like there's another wall in the way. And I believe that the wall is these controls. And so, as I said before, energy is very important, and disruptive technology and finding ways to harness this technology is one of the important things that we have to do. And Tesla's already done this, and people since him have done this. It's just a matter of getting the right set of circumstances together. And the only way that's going to happen is if there's a large volume of people working on it at the same time. And also, as I mentioned earlier, land is very important to this, because even if you own your own land, technically, you still have to pay property taxes. You can't do this and you can't do that without getting a permit. And also, one of the biggest problems is we're still steeped in the land distribution situation, to define it some way, that we experienced during feudalism. There was never any kind of transfer. There's this myth that a couple hundred years ago we had these revolutions and we overthrew the tyrants that oppressed us for centuries. And really all that happened was a bunch of people got killed and some things were written down on pieces of paper. But nothing really about our relationship, especially in regards to land ownership, has changed. And if you don't control your own land, then you don't really have self-ownership, and that's a big problem. So one of the solutions that I would propose is something that's already been philosophically understood for a long time, except it hasn't really been put into practice, and that's direct homesteading. And I also do believe in respect for squatters' rights too, in situations where people have been there first. That's obvious, they leave their land, they're in use of that land. And that's one of the main problems that we have today, because even in third world countries where you have people working in sweatshops, most of them people are in that position for a reason. It's because most of them have been displaced from the land that they have known how to survive off of for centuries through their ancestors, and they're forced into this kind of above-the-table world that they're not even accustomed to, and that's why we have a lot of these problems and people being taken advantage of all over the world, because their direct property rights aren't being respected. And nobody really sees that in terms of indigenous people, because everybody says that they don't believe in property rights, so we can just take that from them. We can just take this land that we're using. And in reality, I don't really know how true that is. I'm not entirely convinced by that. A lot of native cultures had, trade routes even with Westerners, like the Vikings. And they even had disputes over land and stuff, which I'm not totally in agreement with. But it kind of puts that theory to rest that, it was just the dumb indigenous people don't understand property, so we can just take this from them. And they treat people who aren't in the elite in that same way too, because they say, oh, well, they're not smart enough to realize that we basically have them on a fiefdom. So we're going to continue to do that because that's what they deserve. That's the mentality of these people for the most part. And ever since the Middle Ages, this is how it's been. If you think about it, if there's an aristocrat in the 1500s and he has this massive plot of land with some slaves on it, well, he's going to pass that land down to his succeeding generation, and the slaves are going to pass their unfortunate set of circumstances down onto their children, and it's just going to be a repeating process. And a lot of people have a hard time understanding that, and they're saying, oh, well, this is some orchestrated conspiracy that you're saying happened over the course of thousands of years, like it was people planning that over that time. And in a lot of ways they did, but still it has just been a natural process of these two separate classes growing up over the years, and there being these dividing lines that remain in place. And that is the various resource control monopolies that I'm talking about. So if they prevent us from using the resources around us, and they keep a cap on how many resources are possible in a society, and they do this with money systems, because if they create the amount of money, they control what's going on throughout the whole currency system and how everybody trades, then they can define how wealthy a whole group of people is, up to the size of a country. And this has happened on all of the plantations, essentially, which eventually became countries. And now we're in the situation where we're in today, where we're starting to evolve to the point where we can move beyond that, and we can talk the talk, but we haven't been able to walk the walk yet. we all understand that the non-aggression principle and treating people with respect and having self-ownership is the right thing to do. It is the right way to lead society. And everybody understands that what we're doing today is wrong, but nobody can really figure out or be willing to take that leap into how to get there. And so homesteading is definitely, I think, respecting that property right is extremely important, especially for people who are indigenous in third world countries, because their property rights are never even talked about in that context. And another one that people don't really think of is one of the most important resources is our creativity and our mind and the intellectual property monopoly. And it's important to talk about that because I was just talking about property. That's kind of one of the aspects of Newspeak that they slipped in there. Because intellectual property isn't property. As I said earlier, property was talking about scarce goods and stuff like that. So an idea is not scarce. Sure, people can make money off of things, and we have that whole argument, but it doesn't drive incentive because it raises the barrier to entry for putting ideas into action. So if somebody has an idea that they want to put into action, they first have to get the money and the lawyers together, file all the correct patent paperwork and do all this. And then they have specific control of that idea and everything that comes from it. And it prevents other people from utilizing their own good ideas in whichever way that they see fit. One example from history that I learned of just recently was the Wright brothers, who apparently invented the airplane. But they really didn't. They just took a bunch of other people's ideas, which I'm totally cool with, but what I'm not cool with is they were the first ones to actually file the paperwork and get the patent and get the lawyers to prevent anybody else from using that idea. So then they maintained a monopoly on that idea for so long, to the point where it got to when America was entering large wars with planes, they were all getting totally shot down by superior aircraft from overseas because they didn't have all those intellectual property restrictions. And we see that today with all the cell phone manufacturers and Samsung and Apple constantly suing each other for billions of dollars. And they spend more money on legal fees and all of that than they do on research and development. And that is what intellectual property does. And that's just one of the things that totally blows that incentive argument out of the water. Because everybody says that the artists will have no reason to create. And in reality, intellectual property has just been so record companies and publishers and things like that can just bilk the artists and the creators for as much money as they can get out of them, because they're the ones who got the lawyers, they're the ones who have the upfront costs, so they can handle that. But when it comes time to the person who actually came up with the idea to want to utilize that, they're the ones who are going to put themselves in legal trouble. And that's like all of the myths that permeate our society. It's good for you. We promise it's good for you. And it's the same way with intellectual property. And another interesting fact that I learned recently from Rick Falkbinge, which is the leader of the Pirate Party in Iceland, and they're extremely successful. I'm not one for creating political parties to advance ideas, but I still do think what they're doing is really cool, and the ideas that they are putting out there are really cool. The intellectual monopoly first came into place in 1577, and that was something that Queen Mary did to protect her own media racket at the time. It was a propaganda tool to keep other publishers, independent publishers, from rising up and saying anything wrong about the establishment, and I'll put wrong in quotes. And that has kind of extended to the economy as far as inventions are concerned. And they've just taken that same copyright idea that was originally used for censorship to censor people who are trying to come up with ideas that might put their businesses into jeopardy, that may put their paradigm into jeopardy. So it's one of the tools that they use against us, and they tell us that it's for our own good. And in the end, it just creates middlemen that can take advantage of artists and producers. It really doesn't do anything for the producers, and it definitely doesn't do anything for the innovation process. And solving the intellectual property problem is easy. It's already solving itself through technology. Just stop throwing people in cages for using other people's ideas. It's really that simple. So the other thing is that with the central banking system, if they can control everything about how we trade, down to how many units of trade are in circulation, then they can pretty much prevent abundance from ever being created. And I think that since the beginning of the currencies, and I'll take a quick minute to define currencies and money. I kind of would think that they're the same thing, but they're misrepresented in my opinion. They're not a measurement of trade. It's not it's not even a store of value. It's basically a state issued, one specific, I call it one coin to rule them all. That's kind of what you have to look out for. If somebody is trying to say, oh, well, use this, use our infrastructure, use everything that we're putting out there, they have control of everything that you do. And I think that we can move past the point where there's even really that much of a necessity for currencies and money and things like that. But I still think that even when you get to a point of abundance, there's going to need to be some sort of calculation situation, because there are still going to be resources that aren't 100% renewable. We still have situations with food where we need to encourage production in a voluntary and peaceful way. So one of the things that I was thinking of is how we can get out of this, because with economics, it's very dangerous, because you're talking about, as I was saying earlier, people's property and what they create from their property. So as much as we have an extreme problem with a scarcity paradigm on this planet, and we do have a great amount of inequality, I don't necessarily think that just storming the gates of everybody who has a little bit more than us and trying to take what they have, I don't think that that's any kind of solution. I think that the solution is finding a way to empower ourselves and they can't control all the land in the world. And we have this technology now, and a lot of people might be familiar with Bitcoin, and a lot of people are hesitant about it, and I am too in some ways, but I think that it shows us a glimpse into what is possible without central banking, and how we can create a paradigm where abundance is a possibility. And one of the things that people are apprehensive about Bitcoin is the fact that it's digital. And I agree that can be a problem, because you don't have hard assets and if some kind of grid goes down, you're pretty much screwed. But it doesn't really go with the elite's whole plan because it's completely anonymous, and it has an interesting algorithm where it calculates its own value. And that algorithm, I think, can be extremely useful in people deciding to create new currencies amongst themselves and not force it on other people like we've had throughout history, with every king realizing that the minting whatever people used to trade was completely essential to controlling how they lived. And I forget the name of the experiment, but it's kind of come into my head randomly with the pigeons that were in a situation of scarcity. And the scientist, I'm sorry that I forget his name, but he realized that if you could choke them off from their food supply or from their resource supply, that they will just eat at each other, and they'll not be concerned with their confinement. And that has been implemented on us even more in, since that was discovered it was one of the behaviorists, I believe. But as I was saying with Bitcoin, with that algorithm, if somebody else were to create something that was backed by whatever we were trading, say everything we were trading, maybe if somebody wanted to back it by food, and I think that would encourage people to grow food in their backyards, and maybe the community markets would turn into more like pawn shops where people would, they would exchange whatever they have, building supplies, and they could use their cell phone and it could be encrypted, and they can get it scanned at the place. And like I said, this isn't a permanent solution, and this isn't a one-fits-all solution. This is just a hypothetical, kind of me theorizing what's possible and how we can arrange the scarce resources that are around us to create abundance, so we can get past this point of, trying to claw at each other for our next meal. And I think that is definitely an artificial situation that's been created for us. If it was the natural progression of history that was actually taking place, I think that we would be way past the point of scarcity, and I wouldn't even really have to have this conversation. But as I said before, with the property ownership as the way it is, and them controlling how we use our property through money and through intellectual property, they are able to control how we act, how we live, and then that kind of permeates through to our culture and how we treat one another. And that's the mess that goes on outside that everybody blames the current situation on. So then we all end up hating our neighbors, and we end up wanting the master to punish our neighbors just because of the pain that we're currently experiencing that was created by our master to begin with. And I use that term loosely because, as I said before, freedom is a state of mind. And if we could move past even believing that state of authority that they've put into our minds that they benefit from, then we can totally move past this a lot faster than before. So, like I said before, like I was talking about the currency situation with the possibility of technology, and if we actually enable the people in our community to just trade with each other however they wanted, I think that would be beneficial in creating abundance. And like I said, you could probably come up with an idea that's a million times better if you put your mind to it. And I think that when we get to the point where we actually are creating abundance, it'll probably look nothing like I said. It'll probably be Star Trek compared to what I said. Because we can never predict what the natural course of human beings, interacting with each other peacefully will create. Because when that happens, amazing things are created and radical changes happen in society for the better. But unfortunately, it's kind of happened rarely. And we're going to really need to move this message forward, which I really think is happening from seeing the success of this event and how in recent years, especially with all of the sketchy stuff that's been going on in the news in the past year, people aren't buying it anymore. And a lot of it is because these resource control monopolies are crumbling. The intellectual property, that's crumbling. The monetary system, that's crumbling. It's all overthrowing itself, essentially. And the end result of that, and it's happened throughout history when all of these kind of systems have collapsed that we've depended on, yet they've enslaved us, people have always asked for more enslavement, and they have always gotten tricked into going along with that. And the only way to really prevent that is to build the bridges while this is collapsing and know which way we're getting out. And that is my main, over the past couple of years, that is what I have found as a solution, as the primary solution, is just, it's already coming down. There's nothing that people can do to save this paradigm or this way of life. It's the truth. It's done. We are witnessing a dying age. And instead of trying to, resuscitate that back to life, it's not worth it. We don't want that. We should be celebrating the end of this horrible thing that's collapsing around us. And that's why, it's a lot of heavy research that we do, and it's a lot of nasty things that we see that everybody looks away from. But there's a lot of positive going on right now, because all of this stuff that we've seen throughout history is slowly shedding itself as our species grows up. At least that's the way that I look at it. Slowly little by little, we ditch these idiosyncrasies that we were kind of born into, and these divisions, You'll notice like every generation there's like a little bit less bigotry and a little bit less hate. And yeah, our generation is pretty screwed up, and especially the young people are really twisted and confused. But the general cultural kind of consciousness, I believe, has risen steadily, even though it doesn't really look like it out there. And as all these things collapse, I think that there's never been a point in history during one of these collapses in civilization where people have had so much opportunity to create something different, because so many of these monopolies have been trashed and broken. We've almost completely destroyed them. And we've done it peacefully for the most part, because we don't have another choice. We don't have any other choice but to fight peacefully. Because when we fight them at their own game, they completely annihilate us. I mean, look at what they showed off in Boston this past week with their whole martial law shutdown. They did not need to do that. That was intimidation, that was practice, and that is the kind of fury that they unleash on you when you fight them on their own battlefield. And so you just got to constantly sabotage what they're doing and just sabotage this paradigm. And the more people that are doing that and figuring out how to live their day-to-day lives without that, you're not even really making yourself a target for their violence, because the only way that they can actually inflict all this violence that they do on everybody is if everybody goes along with it, like they unfortunately did in Boston. And if people, if there are certain things that are even taboo for them, then you're saving people. And I just feel that if we look at all of the bad things around us, most of it is bad things coming to an end. And we just kind of got to find that new beginning. And that's kind of the question that everybody has, how to get from here to there. Usually that's one of the things that come up in conversations where you try to talk to people about changing the status quo, and they say, well, I can't be bothered with that unless I have some kind of step-by-step process that you can write down for me, like, you know, the politicians give me, and that they don't even follow through on anyway. So that's what people want, and that's what they expect, and we're not going to be able to give that to anybody, because that's not possible. We can't predict the future. So instead of predicting the future, we need to just create the future while they're sitting there, you know, twiddling their thumbs and walking around in circles, promoting this paradigm that currently exists. If we actually build something that's better, they really have no choice to go along with it. And we have the tools at our disposal, and there are people that are working really hard to kind of create this paradigm. And I was talking earlier about intellectual property and how we put an end to that, or are on our way to, through, you know, the internet, downloading music and things like that. And that's about to take a whole new direction, even farther, because now with 3D printers, that's going to be the next intellectual property battle, because if you're able to manufacture anything you want in your house for free, and they're making that possible. There's a website that they're creating called DefCAD, DEFCAD, and it's being crowdfunded right now by the same guy, Cody Wilson, who was making the 3D printed guns. And that is awesome. I mean, you know, I'm not a violent person. I've never shot a gun, but it's a protective tool. I completely understand that. And if people are going to try to put restrictions on that, the best way to fight that isn't necessarily to beg and plead them to change their mind, because that's never really going to happen. But it's to find a way to use your intellect and find a way to prevent them from stopping you. Make it impossible for them to even do anything about it. And that's what this guy Cody Wilson did. He built plans and figured out how he could send plans around the world to whoever wanted to manufacture a gun and had the equipment in their house to do so. They can do it. Well, now he wants to do the same thing with cars, houses, shoes, anything. And it sounds really crazy, but with this 3D printing technology, that's what's coming next. And this DefCAD website that he's creating will be like a pirate bay for objects. And that could totally destroy the scarcity paradigm that we're currently experiencing. I mean, that they can't 3D print food yet, but they're saying that they will, and I'm a little bit skeptical on that, but there's people out there in lab coats saying that it's possible, so hey, who knows? But yeah, that is the way to do it. See what's around you, the resources that you actually can use at your disposal, and, you know, how can I work to change that paradigm using what is at my disposal? And if we get to the point where there is 3D printers, and we have a sufficient way to calculate the resources that are going on around us and how we trade with one another. There's still going to be some kind of trade, whether it's even ideas or whether it's somebody's still going to have the house on the hill. Somebody's still going to have to take out the garbage. Even if you say that we're going to have robots and stuff, somebody's going to have to fix the robots, and we can't just have robots that fix the robots that fix the robots. There's going to have to be some kind of labor. There's going to have to be, like I said, somebody's going to have to get the house on the hill, and how does that happen? And maybe that'll be solved by the person who takes out the garbage gets the house on the hill. Maybe that's how it'll happen. I'm not sure how free people will work that out, but it's important to recognize, because we're still going to have to, let me say, a lot of the times that these radical changes have been proposed throughout history, there has really been no discussion of that process of how to get from there to here. And there's always a bunch of really nasty stuff in that area where they don't describe. And it's always ends up in a bloodbath one way or the other, and I don't really think that solves anything. Sometimes if you're in direct danger and you need to defend yourself, I'm definitely not against that. But in a situation like we're in, it's so much, I think, more effective, and it has such more long-term results to try to change the paradigm by changing the ideas around you. And everything that I'm talking about, all of these resource control monopolies and all these idea control monopolies, it all comes down to ideas and words. It's not, hardcore slavery anymore where they have us in chains on our bodies. Now it's chains in our minds that they have used really, really sophisticated manipulation to walk us into and keep us into. And we can't break off chains that aren't physically on us with physical actions. If these chains are, on our mental being, no other way to put it, the only way to break free from those chains is to use that same kind of technique, use that same approach. And that, I think, is the key to all this. So, as far as the money situation that I was talking about earlier, if we get to the 3D printing situation and we defeat this class structure that we're currently under, I don't really think that there will be necessarily a stored value that everybody will have to have. I think that there will still be a calculation process for sure, and there will still be a trading process, but I don't buy the line about money being sporadically, even gold. A lot of people are really hooked on that. And I think as far as gold is concerned, if we're talking about solutions, it's a good solution to hedge your bets in difficult times like we're having now. But a lot of people make the same mistake, even that. They want gold to be one coin to rule them all. And even a lot of the Bitcoin people, they want Bitcoin to be the next thing. So that's the problem that we have, is that we're putting this solid store of value on everything that has a centralized control. And even though Bitcoin doesn't have a centralized control, even though it's decentralized, it's still central in the process that it's only one thing. So I don't think that it's valuable to take that approach. What we need to do is just figure out, one, decentralized. Something has to be dispersed into everybody's hands. Everybody's got to have equal access to it. And whatever we do moving forward has to be voluntary, because there's got to be some opt-out. We look at the world we're in today, and there's no opt-out anywhere, even for birth, you know, going to school, all of this stuff. There's no opt-out. And that's the oppression that we currently live under. And that's one of the ideas that we have to take down, is the idea that you can be forced to do something against your will. I mean, that's completely crazy. And even people like us who have that free state of mind and have been able to achieve that, we still get blocked up by all of these situations where other human beings think that they can tell us what to do. And then they think that they can use violence on us when we disobey them. And, you know, regardless of how important our goal might be, like as I was talking about before with creating abundance, we can't sacrifice the means of peaceful means to create any kind of ends, because then you never create the ends that you want to when you use violence. So that is why it is the utmost important that there's an opt-out and that everything is voluntary. And that's not to say that any one of us are going to have the ability to create the next paradigm. But I think that it's important that we talk about these ideas and talk about what the next paradigm should look like, and take all of the hostility out of this conversation, because there's so much hostility when it comes to economic conversations. Because it's tough. You got people who are in poverty and in extremely difficult situations, and then you got people who have kind of came from that and who don't want to be taken advantage of by the government and stuff. So you have good people on both sides of the economic debate who have difficult time talking about ideas because it's so emotional. And for so long, economic viewpoints have always come at the barrel of a gun. And with us, with this, you know, the slave population, I hate to put it crudely, but I definitely want to separate us from the controllers and the people who have implanted us with a lot of these ideas. We have the ability to circumvent everything that's happening, but we don't have the ability to create it today. And we kind of have to push the process by talking about these ideas. And it's definitely not going to happen with the kind of screaming matches that they have on, you know, the mainstream media. And we got to definitely rise above that in philosophical conversations, all right, especially in terms of economics. Because look at the mainstream media. They never get anywhere. And these people that watch the mainstream media, they don't learn anything from the 12 hours a day that they watch of it. All they learn is that the other guy, they don't like the other guy, and they have the talking points for that day, but they haven't gotten anywhere with actually progressing the paradigm. And we have a lot to learn from people who disagree with us. And there are probably things that I have said that you disagree with, and maybe even rightly. And that's totally cool. And we kind of have to get past the point where everybody has to be 100% right on 100% of the issues. because there are definitely objective facts that exist. I'm not debating that. But I definitely would debate the fact that there's somebody out there who has 100% of all those objective facts completely correct. So with that being the case, we should be able to talk about these ideas the same way we would talk about a trivial preference of ours. Just like Swarmy was saying yesterday about ice cream, if you know, are you going to hear somebody having a seriously heated debate about what flavor of ice cream to the point where they don't want to have a relationship anymore, they don't want to be friends anymore? I think that would be completely insane. And yet these ideas are a lot more important and they have a lot more gravity. But at the same time, we're not going to make any progress by thinking that we have nothing to learn. And nobody is going to want to learn anything from us if we act like we don't have anything to learn from them. Because learning is definitely a two-way process. And you know, a good teacher will learn just as much from their students as they give to their students. So a lot of us in this situation that understand what's going on, we see ourselves as teachers, or we fall into that role sometimes, even if we don't really want to. And that's an important thing to remember, that teaching and education is a two-way street that happens between human beings. We all got a piece of the puzzle, and we can all bring it together peacefully, even if we disagree, as long as we agree on the common goals of self-ownership, the non-aggression principle, you know, live and let live. And we can have different ideas. That's totally fine. So, thanks everybody for coming out so early, and you know, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the conference.